So, it's May, and the United States is in the midst of another series of protests and riots revolving around the death of a black man at the hands of police officers. And I'm doing my usual thing at home, checking info on Twitter, reblogging memes on Tumblr, and reading manga chapters on my usual plug because not every series is available legally in English. It is what it is. But I was reading this one translation, and on the credits page, all it said was something along the lines of, "Thanks for reading, #BLM." As a manga and anime fan, I knew immediately that this wasn't gonna go over well, and went to check the credits as fast as I could, and I saw exactly what I expected. A whole lot of keep politics out of my manga, and general Black Lives Matter bashing, making fun of the protesters, and the classic, why don't you just leave if America's so bad? There was also a lot of support for the translator's short statement, but it got me thinking, why are anime fans so against politics in anime and manga? Now, I already know that anime fans are on all ends of the political spectrum in the West. Everybody from the liberal arts major to the right-wing good old boy roots for Naruto to beat Pain's ass. But there's this widespread misinterpretation that anime and manga don't have anything political to add to their works, or any political messages for you to take away from the works. And that kind of thinking is highly amazing to me. Like, even ignoring that all art is inherently political because in any piece's conception, it's going to be expressing some sort of message or belief if it's not trying to hone in on a specific emotion that it's trying to instill on whoever's viewing it. Ignoring all that, I can't believe how people will look at some of these shows and just say, nah, this ain't talking about anything specific, it's just a story in a fictional world. Y'all are thinking about it too much. So I'm gonna go back through some of the more popular anime properties and just see if I can glean any political messages from them based on the text and what their respective authors have to say about said text. This is gonna be off the dome for the most part, and some of it's gonna be after rewatching some of the material. Let's start with arguably the most popular anime franchise in the West, Dragon Ball. Specifically, so everybody remembers the Saiyans, right? What did they do again before the whole Planet Go Boom thing? Warrior race, turning into monkeys, had a legend passed down generationally of a noble warrior that could liberate them from their oppressors, okay. Then King Cold comes through and subjugates them, rules over them for a little bit, and then his son Frieza takes over after a while. He continues the subjugation his father started while harboring a seemingly irrational fear of their legendary warrior, the Super Saiyan, and decides to commit mass genocide on them by destroying their planet. 24 years later, the remnants of the Saiyan race, Goku, Vegeta, and Gohan, band together with another race, Frieza's terrorizing, the Namekians, in order to defeat him and topple his violent regime. That's a broad but fair recap of events throughout the Saiyan and Frieza arcs, right? Now, what could possibly be seen as political about this whole Saiyan-Frieza family conflict? Is it the idea of colonialism under the Frieza family being an ultimately destructive and negative event in Saiyan history, even though they presented their takeover as a mutually beneficial endeavor? Is it the idea that Saiyans were eradicated because they didn't band together against their oppressors and lacked the proper leadership within their community to launch an effective counter-assault against Frieza? Maybe it's how the respective minorities in the Frieza saga, humans, Saiyans, and Namekians, respectively, managed to foil Frieza's plans only because they band together, even if reluctantly, and in doing so were able to bring about visible change in the short and long term. Who knows for sure? No, that's right, Toriyama does. See, Toriyama based Frieza off of real estate speculators in Japan, calling them quote-unquote the worst sort of people. So, Frieza himself, according to the author, was based off of the housing politics of late 80s to early 90s Japan. Oh, and how could I forget Frieza's outward disdain and racism towards Saiyans? I know every black kid watching in the 90s and early 2000s related to what they were going through. Why, you may be asking? Because Frieza would always refer to them as filthy monkeys. Frieza was essentially a rich, powerful racist, except with the physical power to dominate as well as the political power. A white nationalist hero, if you would. And while black fans love to claim Piccolo as one of their own, then Namekians are more akin to native people in any given country, really. Native Americans, Canadians, Japanese, Australians, you name it. If they were a minority that was effectively and systematically wiped out by violent colonialists, then they could probably relate to the Namekians on some level. And while it was only 2 story arcs in the Z portion of Dragon Ball, these are the arcs that put Dragon Ball on the fucking map in the West, and they have dramatic ramifications for the rest of the franchise. So that's how DBZ was political. What other series was obviously political that's got eyes on it here in the States? Well, Naruto's outwardly political with its war is bad messaging, but it's admittedly way messier about its politics than DBZ was. In Naruto, they preach over and over again about how war is bad throughout the entirety of its run. In the manga, we get into how not having enough ninja to go out on missions, combat, or otherwise hurt the Leaf Village's economy after Orochimaru's attack on the village. Genin and tuning ranks are filled out mostly by children for the most part, and while they mainly do shitty missions like picking up lost pets, you really can't forget that they are child soldiers. In the Land of Waves, Zabuza constantly hits on the point that ninja are tools to be used by those who hire them, aka soldiers are tools for the respective establishments, militias are tools to bring about whatever changes they see fit, whether positive or negative. The Naruto world's global economy revolves around separate war economies built on the backs of child soldiers. Obito and Madara, both child soldiers and the primary antagonists in the second half of Naruto, went on global espionage campaigns to weaken world powers, mainly through acquiring tailed beasts from differing villages and lands in order to create the massive genjutsu to ensnare the world in, for the sole purpose of ending warfare forever. Obito might be a fucking simp, but I get it. Not to mention the genocide of the Uchiha people by the state of the Hidden Leaf Village, the straight up slavery of the Hyuga clan's branch family, the outright villainization of covert operatives with Danzo Sai and the rest of the Anbu Black Ops. Naruto's clearly political. It just doubles back on its politics by justifying the horrible atrocities that take place within its world. And even after Naruto becomes ninja president, he does nothing to fix those inherently destructive properties, and they continue to exist in Boruto, but they're just not ever addressed. What's next? Bleach. Typically considered the king of style over substance shonen titles, ignoring the filler arcs you'll see in the anime, it still got its politics in it. Society arc? Ghost feudalism is kinda bad, and just might be rife with corruption. The Arrancar arc? Aizen was an ends justify the means sociopath that experimented on friends and enemies alike, colonized Hueco Mundo through sheer might, and went on to try and launch what would have been a mass genocide on those living in Karakura Town in order to make an Oken to get into the Soul King's palace and take that position for himself so he could take over the world to make things right. Fullbringer's arc could be construed as saying something about building strong bonds throughout your community and what happens if an outside force tears that community apart, but even I'll admit that's a bit of a stretch on my part, but considering the memory manipulation mishaps and Ichigo's friends and family thinking he's going off the deep end, we move. The 1,000-year Blood War arc? Ghost dictatorship is kinda bad. Your heritage doesn't define you, and in a dictatorship, the head of state will usurp you of all of your power, i.e. rights, for their own benefit. The final words of the Bleach manga, last chapter, page 23, are, quote, Bleach, stories of the brave, the end, end quote, implying that one must be brave in order to come to terms with and fight against these things that would corrupt, disrupt, and destroy communities on a micro and macro level. Plus, you can say that Ukiura and Grimjar respectively represent both nihilism and rage, and how you can't let either one of those be a driving force in your life, otherwise you'll get a Getsuga Tensho to the fucking head. What's next? One Piece? Do I really gotta explain how One Piece is political? Of the franchise where the main antagonists are the world government and the marines that work for said government, where 99.9% of the world nobles we see on screen or panel are literally the most vile people in the entirety of the narrative, where the protagonists ended not one, but 2 civil wars back to back and toppled a corrupt monarchy in a single day, or invaded the equivalent of the Supreme Court to get a friend back and directly led to it being literally wiped off of the fucking map, and invaded the underwater Guantanamo Bay on steroids. broke out of Guantanamo Bay on steroids and showcased a one-day war on international air that was caused by a state-sponsored execution? Oh, and how could I forget about the racism and the classism and the slavery? Not to mention the casual imperialism that 3 of the 4 strongest pirates in the narrative actively engage in. People really get into One Piece and forget how politically charged it is. Shit, in the most current arc of the series, the main crew's been planning on overthrowing another corrupt government with a powerful militaristic force backing it. Man, what else? Full Metal Alchemist? For real? Niggas getting called dogs of the military. Roy wants to become the Fuhrer of a mistress in order to bring about progressive change. The Ishvalan genocide, science versus faith, corruption in the military, despots at the head of state, answering to the constituents that chose to back them, and answering to their demands rather than the demands of the people, aka Bradley and Co. answering to father instead of common Emestrians. What makes a king a good king? Do the ends ever justify the means? Human experimentation. You can boil the entirety of Full Metal Alchemist down to war is bad, God wouldn't like that, and you gotta balance faith and science for it. I'm gonna try to cut through some of these fast because I think I already made my point clear, but Trigun is ultimately an environmentalist franchise that preaches pacifism over conflict, but it doesn't want anyone to go away from it thinking you should just allow people to walk all over you, because Vash is a pacifist, but he can and will fuck your shit up if you step up to him. It also has an overt message about the value of human life and how human beings, while stupid and bummy, have the potential for change and are inherently good, but give in to base desires. Please read Trigun Maximum. I don't beg off him, but I'm begging y'all, please read Trigun Maximum. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Hunter x Hunter's York New explores how the worst of the worst band together and why they would in the first place. How far is one willing to go to get revenge, and whether or not something can be gained from it, and how you have to rely on support systems around you in order to not break down mentally from that. The Chimera Anta arc is an absolute critique on how horrible man can be to one another, and how, in an already corrupt state, outsiders can take advantage of that and commit mass genocide rather easily. Dead Man Wonderland is simply a slightly over-exaggerated thesis on how corrupt and ridiculous the Japanese criminal justice system can be, as well as how necessary prison reform both in Japan and in America is so badly needed. Gundam is literally War is Bad, the franchise, with the Universal Century also trying to hammer in the point that you have to have respect and love for your fellow man, regardless of where they're from. You can watch or read almost any Magical Girl series as a feminist text, and it'd fit the bill, but shout out to Sailor Moon, Utena, and arguably Madoka for having major LGBT plus themes as well. If you can find a Satoshi Kon work and honestly say to yourself that it's not political in any way, you have not been paying attention to his work. I strongly urge you to watch them again. Akira is super politically charged, whether you're watching the movie or reading the manga, and thinking it isn't is once again not engaging with it critically at all. I'd throw Ghost in the Shell in there too, with its transhumanist themes and its questions of when does one stop really being human, but not gonna lie, I haven't watched it yet. Yeah, fake anime fans. The entirety of Code Geass is about launching a political uprising and liberating Japan from its active oppressors through force. Yu Yu Hakusho constantly portrayed how power corrupted both its antagonists and the protagonist, starting from the Dark Tournament until the end of the series, along with heritage not defining you, people having the ability to change, and your life being worth more than you think. Logon is an uprising narrative that loudly shouts at its audience to defy those that would try to oppress you and to never stop trying to improve your way of life. In Berserk, every single head of state that we see in the narrative is an absolute fucker, except the one we meet that was never human to begin with. The Conviction arc goes in hard with how corrupt the church can be. It pushes the importance of community and the futility of revenge, while also showing how using your anger in different ways can bring about visible change in yourself as well as your community. If we really want to get controversial, even Rurouni Kenshin has more left-leaning political messaging with its whole war is bad despite positive changes message. Kenshin helped put in place a leader that was ultimately kind of good for Japan, and he was fighting for the cause, but he got a lot of blood on his hands and seeks to repent for all the blood he shed throughout the entirety of the series. And the police force of the previous era, the Shinsengumi, are bad guys in the narrative, even if Saito Hajime turns into a lancer for Kenshin after his introduction. And I would also be remiss not to mention Osamu Tezuka, whose works had varying political messages. Astro Boy had both the good and bad technology could bring about, the horrors of war, and environmentalist themes every now and then. Blackjack was about helping those around you by any means and how racism is bad. Kimba was rough, not gonna lie, but ultimately it's an environmentalist work that really wants people to save the animals. But it just trips over itself with some of the colonialism isn't that bad themes here and there. So, while you can enjoy anime and manga and ignore the political messages in what you're watching or reading, to say that any given series is apolitical is just not correct. The politics are in the work. It's up to the audience to engage with those politics. And while I admit, with some of the examples I've explored, the authors themselves don't necessarily intend to talk about specific messages or political issues on the outset. Like I know for Dragon Ball specifically, Akira Toriyama just set out to tell an adventure story based off of the Monkey King and was influenced by Chinese martial arts movies that were popular at the time. Even one of his editors claims that there's no substance to Dragon Ball at all. But even if they start out writing for fun, every author is going to convey something in their writing, whether it's something they've personally been through or it's something they want people to aspire to. All I'm saying is that it's okay to acknowledge the politics present in the anime and manga that you enjoy. You're not giving into some agenda by noticing its existence, I promise you. What really fucking bugs me are the weebs that are like, Japan never talks about politics. Like, are you serious, dog? First off, trying to look into the political landscape of a foreign country strictly through the media they export to yours, or that someone steals and distributes to yours, is ignorant at best and racist at worst. Second, Japan is a separate nation. Of course it's going to have political issues of its own. Japan is not some candy-coated wonderland where everyone eats sushi and ramen every day and watches nothing but anime. You niggas really gotta cut that shit the fuck out. Don't just project what you personally would like onto a whole fucking country. It's weird, bro. And I would like to show some appreciation to the Japanese protesters that were marching in support of Black Lives Matter. I see you and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And to finally end this, when people try to put up walls between the media they consume and real-world issues, it does a lot of the media that they're consuming a disservice. You can't play Metal Gear Solid and not take anything away from it. The same way you can't watch or read Akira without thinking about something. The best art, no matter the medium, leaves whoever engages with it thinking about something. And if you come away from an anime or manga thinking about something in real life, then that's a good thing. And I understand the want and the need for escapism, especially in stressful times, and you can still dive into your favorite anime and lose yourself in that world as many times as you want to. But I urge you to take the time to critically engage with what you're looking at every once in a while. You don't have to become a literary analyst. Just ask yourself what it's trying to say.